Сайн байцгаана уу хүнд үзэгчдээ. Өнөөдөр орой манай дефакто нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Канада улсаас Монгол улсад суугаа онц бөгөөд бүрэн эрхт элчин сайд ноён Gregory Goldhawk оролцож байна. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
Ambassador, you have been, I think you are the longest staying residence ambassador, second ambassador of Canada to this country, and please tell us about the impression that before you leave, how do you see the career period of diplomatic service in Mongolia as ambassador?
Well, that's difficult to summarize in just a few words, but I'll try.
Okay.
I and my family have been here 4 years now, almost 4 years, 4 really wonderful years, I would say. For me, they really have been professionally the most challenging, interesting, and satisfying years of my career. I would say personally, they've also been very, very wonderful years for myself. And my family as well. My daughter has been in a school she really loves. My wife has been quite intimately involved in a range of cultural and social issues here that have kept her quite interested and engaged. So it really has been 4 fantastic years for us, both professionally and personally.
And I think it is also same in terms of cooperation between 2 countries.
I think so, yeah.
What was the major events happened last 4 years?
Well, again,
in that sense,
difficult to summarize. Our embassy, which is only itself about 5 years old, has gone through a major evolution in the course of the last 4 years, I would say. Since I arrived here, the embassy has moved location into a new permanent home in downtown Ulaanbaatar. We've substantially increased the number of personnel that we have. We've substantially increased the number of activities in which we're involved here in Mongolia, and we've celebrated 40 years of diplomatic relations between the 2 countries and seen some quite significant visits between the 2 countries. Most recently from Canada, the visit of Canada's Governor General, Honorable David Johnston, in last November, and others as well. And we'll see more senior level visits before I depart here. So it's been 4 years of tremendous challenge and growth and achievement, I would say.
You mean the visit of Foreign Minister of Canada?
Yeah. We're anticipating at the end of this month, July, the visit of Canada's Foreign Minister, the Honorable John Baird, here, which will mark the first time that a Canadian Foreign Minister has visited Mongolia. So it's something that I've been looking forward to with great anticipation, I'd say, as have our Mongolian friends from within government and business circles.
You know, during your work tenure here in Mongolia, we have been implementing a policy called the Third Neighbors Policy.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see, for the last 4 years, the changes in that, or efficiency or result of that foreign new concept, policy of Mongolia?
Well, first of all, let me say that I think that the third neighbor policy is quite a sensible one for Mongolia. I think Mongolia rightly is looking to diversify its relationships in the world, to be respectful of, but at the same time less dependent on its 2 closest neighbors, Russia and China, as a part of as economic and other kinds of partners. So I think the third neighbor policy is a very sensible one for Mongolia to be pursuing. I would say too that one of the real satisfactions for me over the course of the last 4 years has been to watch Mongolia grow in its sophistication, in its engagement with the larger world, to watch Mongolia become a more of a weighty player, if you will, in issues that affect this region, Asia, and the world. I have noticed a growth in that kind of capacity, and it's been very satisfying to watch.
Please tell us what makes different Canada compared to other third neighbor countries to Mongolia.
Well, I think the first thing that maybe distinguishes Canada from some of the others is the fact that we as two countries and as two peoples share a lot of similarities. We're both, very large countries in our respective areas, with very small populations, comparatively speaking. Very difficult and challenging climate, topography, geography. We both share an interest with larger neighbors, significantly larger neighbors, and we both are economies that have been founded on resource development, I would say. So in that sense, Canada has evolved along a pathway that I think Mongolia may be seeking to go itself in the future. So we have a lot to share as peoples, I think, in terms of our experience of living and our experience of how we've developed.
Let's talk a bit about the resources, which makes also similar. And out of many mining-related investment companies that are listed on the Western stock markets, Canada has a special place, if not the largest. How do you see this mining cooperation between two countries in the mining industry, where, because it's a larger presence of companies related to your country in Mongolia, you have seen the ups and downs of this industry during exactly your stay. Now we are a bit sort of downwards directions. How do you see that metaphor, the changes?
Well, certainly you're not wrong when you say that we've seen quite an evolution in the situation in Mongolia here over the course of the 4 years that I've been here. I've charted that evolution myself in terms of the activities of my own embassy. When I first arrived here, we were very, very much on an upswing. There was quite significant confidence in Mongolia and Mongolia's trajectory as a major hub for mining activity in global terms. And I continue to believe that Mongolia has the capacity to be that major player on the world stage in mining in economic terms. But beyond question, we've seen a bit of a reversal over the course of the last few years. Part of that reversal has been occasioned by the general decline globally in the prices for international commodities. And that really has affected everybody. I mean, that's affected Mongolia, that's affected Canada, Chile, Australia. I mean, anybody who had an economy founded on natural resources was inevitably going to be affected by that. And that has certainly been true for Mongolia. My sense is that the effects of that decline have been amplified in Mongolia's case by a series of sort of missteps, you might call it, on the policy front that have created an environment that has depressed confidence here in Mongolia to a larger degree than maybe has happened in other places. So at the present time, we're in a bit of a trough. There's no question about that, I think, yeah.
In terms of, well, you talked about the foreign direct investment, slowdown of it, certain policy changes that made it faster. I personally find, I write about that, is a lot reason beyond that is issue of public governance quality. And I remember I have interviewed a person from your public service, and what is the level of cooperation in that sense, how the good public governance is being sort of shared between two countries?
A good question. I would say that the cooperation in that regard is continuing, and I hope will continue to grow, honestly. I mean, if you talk to any company here, and I'm not just talking about Canadian companies, and I'm not just talking about other foreign companies, I'm even talking about Mongolian companies, they will tell you that one of the major impediments to the growth of their businesses here is the regulatory environment in which they work. Without a good, solid, and stable regulatory environment, businesses can't have the confidence to do what they need to do in terms of their social role, which is create wealth, hire people, pay taxes, etc. So one of the major focus points for my embassy's work, not just my embassy, but others as well, but one of the major focus points for us has been working with Mongolian authorities to see how we can contribute to improvements in the efficiency and the effectiveness of policy making and policy delivery, I guess I would say. It's a very important ongoing focus for us.
It brings me to questions of quality of public institutions. For example, after major elections, after parliament elections in your country, no public officers have been replaced or changed because the other party won the election. How come?
It's a part of our history and traditions over time. I mean, we in Canada follow sort of more of a British Westminster model, I guess you'd say, in which you have a core civil service, which is the culture within that service is that you serve the government of the day without distinction and in a professional manner. And it's nonpartisan. It's intended to be nonpartisan, professional. And that's the kind of culture, corporate culture in which I've been.
For that change of culture, you used to call before the people who is working for government called government services or government officials or state officials, then later you changed into public services.
And in a way, it's a trick of language, but in fact it's more than just language. I mean, it's a fundamental understanding of what the role of government is. I mean, one of the things that struck me when I first got here is that people would refer to themselves as being with the civil service, and their sense was that they worked for the government. I've come from a tradition where I call myself a public servant, not a civil servant. And it's just a change of just two words, really.
But conceptual change.
But the conceptual change is quite significant.
You don't work for government, you work for the people.
I work for the people.
That's
my paycheck may come from the government, but that's only for the convenience of the tax authorities. I work for the public, and that's really inculcated in any Canadian civil, public service.
And I noticed
employee right from the beginning. I mean, it's part of the culture, really.
So you really being working for the government means you are actually working for the people.
Yeah.
All right, that's
your role is to deliver services.
Ambassador, what does it take to be ambassador in your country? From where you start, and why exactly you to be ambassador?
Well, gosh, part of the answer is I'm lucky, and I will say I feel very, very lucky indeed to be Canada's ambassador here in Mongolia during this fascinating period in this wonderful country's history. I mean, I can't tell you how privileged I feel.
Okay, then let me ask in a different way. You are son of farmer.
That's true,
right?
Yeah.
You have been working on your young adulthood as a farmer, helping your father.
Until the age of 19, I lived on the farm, yeah.
And why you have decided to be foreign office?
That's interesting.
Serviceman.
I'll be honest, I mean, I was always quite interested in the wider world in terms of the international life. The stories of other countries and other cultures and other languages always fascinated me, even as a small child. So I knew from an early moment in my own personal history that whatever I did with my life, I wanted to do something that would take me to those places so that I could live with those people in these exotic locations and live as they did and speak as they did and share their lives, make them part of my own experience. So I knew that from an early moment. So when I was formulating my education, it was always with an eye towards an international career that would involve business somehow.
So you have been to several countries during your interesting career. How many countries?
You know, I'm
You
not
have
sure.
served?
I'd have to stop and count them up, I guess.
Yeah, and just to
half a
name a
dozen.
few where you have
Oh,
started.
well, I've spent a good fraction of my career in the United States. I've also been with the Canadian Embassy in Greece.
Southeast Asia?
At the Canadian Consulate General in Sydney, Australia, Canadian Embassy in Bangkok, Thailand, with stops along the way in Ottawa now and then. But I'm a career public servant. I've been with the Canada's Department of Foreign Affairs, International Trade and Development for over 30 years now, and have risen through the ranks to arrive here in Mongolia.
What look like your good days as ambassador here?
Oh, look, it has been a wonderful experience for me. You know, there are days, as I joke with my colleagues at the embassy, I said, you know, here in Mongolia, you can be overjoyed and delighted and frustrated and unhappy, sometimes even in the same day.
The same day.
But
like our weather.
Yeah, but, well, maybe, like Canadian weather maybe too. But I've never been bored in Mongolia, not even for 1 second. There's always been some new challenge or new delight that has kept me focused on the main task, which for me has been trying to build the relationship between Canada and Mongolia in new directions. When I first came here, we really, as two countries, really had only one topic to talk about, and that topic was commerce, it was mining, it was investment, it was money. One of the things in which I take a very great satisfaction is the fact that, looking back now after 4 years, we as two countries have a conversation which is much richer, much more dynamic and diverse and interesting than the one that we had when I came here. We now are not just partners in commerce, but we're partners in issues related to international peace and security, not just in this region, but in the world. Canada and Mongolia are working together on defense development, policing, legal reform, judicial reform, public service reform, as you have noted, medical research, on and on. It seems every time I turn around, I discover some new way in which Canadian governmental entities, Canadian non-governmental entities, Canadian companies, individual Canadians and Mongolians are working together to produce really extraordinary things.
What is the most interesting project in that security, police, and international security issues?
They're all fascinating in their own way. You know, everyone has its own challenges and its own achievements. You know, it would be very hard for me to point to one that I could say is more important than the other, I guess. They all, in my own mind, have an equivalent importance. For me, the larger issue is that we have more to talk about as two countries now. We aren't talking about just one thing, mining and commerce and money and investment. You know, we have a more interesting and diversified conversation, which is the way it should be between friends. You know,
you know, I have been to PDAC, how we call it, PDAC, right?
Yeah, PDAC,
This geologist exploration annual event every year in Toronto, right?
Mm.
And future of Mongolia may be close to you, being a country that bring mining logistics to other countries. Maybe firstly here we have skills we learn here. Many companies already do.
Mm.
Like many Canadian companies do. You are more international players, and in that sense, vocational training, mining logistics, education. How do you see that part of cooperation in that field between two countries?
Well, I think that if you're looking at strictly the commercial side of the ledger, I mean, one of the other satisfactions is to have watched a certain kind of diversification in the ways that we're working together commercially. When I first came, it was only about investment, and it was only about investment in mining. But increasingly, we're seeing, partly as a consequence of the activities of those, pioneering Canadian companies who came here first of all. But we've seen a diversification in the commercial activities in which we're engaged. We're increasingly seeing, for example, collaboration in things like building technologies, timber frame construction, for example, which is being employed and applied to, I think, Mongolia's great advantage in the SUM Center projects that are developing throughout the country. We've also seen a quite significant new emphasis in the area of educational exchange, and not just exchanges of students, but also exchanges of teachers, researchers, teaching materials. Earlier on, I spoke about research in the medical field. A lot of that has been driven by research institutes based at universities here in Mongolia and in Canada as well. And they're doing research here on topics that are of direct interest to the health of Mongolian citizens. Now that isn't a commercial endeavor, but we have seen quite a diversification in the commercial side of our work as well. So I count that as something of a very significant success for us.
During the General Governor visit to Mongolia, there were many universities were coming from Canada to Mongolia.
Yes, that's
last
true.
year.
Yeah. The Governor General's visit was coincidentally, and I will say it was coincidentally, a happy coincidence, I'd say, but just a coincidence. It coincided with the first ever Canadian educational fair here. And we had a little more, I think, than 20 Canadian teaching institutions, some of them high schools, but most of them post-secondary colleges and universities, who came here to meet with young Mongols who are looking to explore options for international education. Many young Mongols are very familiar with the US, they're very familiar with Australia or the UK, etc. But they're looking for another option as well, and we are hoping that Canada can be, a potential option for them. And we were very gratified by the turnout, I must say. We weren't sure how many people we would have who would come during the course of our day, but it truly exceeded all of our expectations. We were very pleased. We'll be doing it again this year, I think, in October. I might need to check that, but I think it's October or November we'll be doing it again.
Is it, what will be the difference for Mongolian students going to the US to Canada in terms of scholarship or the cost of fee education? What can you tell us?
Well, there are already young Mongolians studying in Canada, of course, and studying all the way across my country, from Vancouver through Calgary, through even as far east as Montreal. And if you asked them why they chose Canada, oftentimes the things that would come to the forefront of their minds would be cost, because oftentimes it's quite a bit less expensive to pursue education in Canada than it might be in other locations. The other thing that a lot of them will say to you is the quality of the experience, I guess you would say. You know, Canadian society is extremely multicultural, extremely diverse, and I think a lot of young international students find that a very congenial environment to be in. I mean, you can be a Mongol person and with your own traditions and et cetera, and you'll fit right into Canadian society because we're fairly accepting of, in fact, I would say not just accepting, but we celebrate diversity. It's part of how we identify ourselves as a country. Take a place like Toronto, for example. I hope I have my statistic right here, but I believe that something like 50% of the people who live in Toronto, which is our largest city, not only weren't born in Toronto, they weren't born in Canada. I mean, as one index of the diversification of the country. And I think a lot of young Mongols, not just Mongols, but people from other countries, maybe even including a lot of young people from the United States, find that a quite interesting experience. You layer on top of course, that we have 2 official languages in Canada, French and English. So if you want to perfect your French or your English, Canada's not a bad place to go.
I have visited several times your country. I was impressed with this multiculture. I think it is even more, probably in a certain sense, than the US. A lot of people who was not born exactly in Canada, first generation immigrants, and doing the city very colorful. And I think that's the trend of developed countries nowadays. Have you been traveling in Mongolia?
Not nearly as much as I would like.
Okay.
I'll be honest with you. You know, I will tell you that I harbor a couple of small regrets about my time in Mongolia. And one of those regrets is that I have probably not applied myself as well as I could have or should have to the acquisition of Mongolian language skills.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
That's, you know, I mean, I say that honestly and forthrightly. The other thing is that I simply haven't traveled as much as I would have liked in this wonderful country. I guess the good news about all of that is that I can come back as a tourist.
Okay.
And I intend to come back as a tourist, and I intend to see every part of this beautiful country.
One of the things struck me in Canada was the mining provinces were sharing their royalty from mining with the regions which has not mining, in terms of as a local community, which I thought gives an opportunity to non-mining provinces, not necessarily to be a mining provinces, which is not the case in Mongolia. So I thought this is a very good lesson, and there are similar many lessons that Mongolians to learn from you, from your past, how you have done some mistakes here and then you have corrected. And I thought that would be an interesting case for Mongolians. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I think you're correct. I mean, there are a lot of lessons perhaps from Canada's experience of developing itself on a resource-based economy that we could share with Mongolia. I don't say that Mongolia should import our experience without modification, because clearly the circumstances are different in Mongolia, and it should be adapted to Mongolia's reality. But over the course of time, we have learned quite a bit about how you develop a proper regulatory environment for mining and for business generally, I would say. And we learned those lessons in some cases the hard way because we made big mistakes. Maybe sometimes still make big mistakes. But I think that a lot of what we understand about how to do mining in a socially acceptable and environmentally sustainable way could be a model for Mongolia as well.
All right.
Yeah.
What's next after Mongolia?
Oh, wow. Right now I'm not exactly sure. To be honest with you, I prefer not to think about it almost, you know. I mean, I'm not leaving Mongolia, you know, happily, I guess you would say. You know, my time here is definitely finished. I recognize that. But Mongolia, as my daughter said to me as she herself was leaving Mongolia the other day, we put her on the airplane to go to North America. And she said, "Dad, Mongolia has changed me." She said, "I love everything about this country and all the people in it."
Wow.
And she said, "I will never think of this as my ex-diplomatic posting. I will always think of it as my home." And my reaction was, "Darling daughter, you have said it far better than I ever could." Well, because that's really how I...
Continuing this logics of your daughter, Sydney, right?
Sydney, yes. Yeah.
Continuing, going on what Sydney said, Canada changed also, Mongolia. And I would like to thank you for being a part of that change. You did a great job, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being my guest.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All the best.
All the best.
Thank you very much. За хүн үзэгчдээ өнөөдөр ороо манай дефактоны төлөвийн зочноор Канада улсаас Монгол улсад суугаа онц бөгөөд бүрэн эрхт эчин сайд Gregory Goldhog оролцлоо их баярлалаа. Баярлалаа.
Well, the work I do in cultural diplomacy, I call it theater diplomacy, but most people, theater is not as important, so I find cultural diplomacy can reach between different fields. Theater is something that I believe can influence society. So when you have an opportunity to work with new theater, and as I did with Vagina Monologues, it was the first independent production in the first non-state-run theater with the Black Box. That was the first time breaking social taboo, being able to open up the box and have people talk about issues in Mongolian and English in a way that had never been done before.
What was the topic of that?
It was the Black Box, I call it V-Day or Vagina Monologues, was women's issues about their body and never being able to talk about the taboo issues related to sexuality, whether they are a disabled woman or an elderly person or someone who had been raped, or these issues had not been openly discussed here. So I thought it was really important, and Young Women for Change needed somebody to produce and direct, and they knew I had experience, so they asked me, and I did it. And I raised money for the National Center Against Violence. So everything I do, all the money goes towards charity or vulnerable women and children projects. So
that's certainly a good contribution to make the society better. Talk on the issues that usually they don't. So the society doesn't talk.
Yes, yeah. Well, obviously it opens up the dialogue, and then it allows more to happen. I always believe that the art and the process is important, but it's really the issues that you're changing. It's the social norms that people are willing to talk about and that they weren't willing to talk about before. So it's groundbreaking, but you're right, you have to move on. So film, theater, visual art, dance, all these things can be used to make bridges between countries and build new works that actually share each culture.